The White House pressed today on Biden's popularity within the Democratic Party. NTD's Iris Tao has more on a new poll and the administration's response.
According to a poll released Sunday by ABC News and The Washington Post, only 35% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents favor Biden for the 2024 nomination. More than half want the party to pick someone else.
Is the president concerned by this? How's he digesting a number like that?
But look, the president will say, as I am saying right now, is his focus is not on himself. His focus is on continuing to deliver for the American people. We have done everything that we can. The president has made lowering costs for the American people a priority.
While the White House on Monday defended the president by touting the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, the poll puts the approval rate for Biden's handling of the economy at just 36%. But the press secretary insists
when you think about Medicare, you think about Social Security, you think about the pieces of legislation that we have passed, they are very popular with the American people.
Meanwhile, former White House press secretary Jen Psaki says this about the upcoming midterm election and Democratic candidates.
If it is a referendum on the president, they will lose, and they know that. They also know that crime is a huge vulnerability for Democrats.
Trump said earlier this month that the election is a referendum on Biden, as well as on what he calls skyrocketing inflation. And that's as he hinted at running again at a rally just days ago.
And we may just have to do it again, right? We may have to do it again.
And the new poll finds about half of Republican-leaning respondents support Trump for a second term, while also about half say they want a different GOP candidate. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney says she will not remain a Republican if former President Trump is the GOP's presidential pick in 2024. Here's what she said over the weekend.
I'm going to make sure Donald Trump, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he's not the nominee. And if he is the nominee, I won't be a Republican.
Cheney adds that she would be willing to campaign for Democrats to stop GOP nominee Kari Lake from winning the Arizona gubernatorial race. Lake is an outspoken critic of election fraud. Cheney is on her way out of Congress after she lost the Republican primary in August. She's also one of only 2 Republicans on the January 6th committee, which will hold its next hearing on Wednesday. There are more signs showing that the recession is getting worse. A key economic gauge from the Conference Board, a nonpartisan think tank, dropped for the 6th month in a row. Many economy experts have been reluctant to say the economy is in a recession. The Conference Board said last week that the leading economic index fell by 0.3% in August. Their senior director for economics said that this is, quote, potentially signaling a recession. According to figures from Fox News, the value of the stock market has dropped by $7.6 trillion since President Biden took office. Another report by the Heritage Foundation says that Americans have lost the equivalent of $4,200 in annual income under the Biden administration. This is owing to soaring inflation and higher interest rates. Huge multinational companies are expected to release their earnings in the coming weeks, and experts say they could indicate where the U.S. economy is headed. And in this economic downturn, the Federal Reserve continues raising interest rates with hopes of slowing the economy enough to get inflation under control. Congressman Dan Muser serves on the Small Business Committee. I recently caught up with him to get his thoughts. Congressman Dan Muser, thank you so much for joining us.
Steve, pleasure to be with you.
Congressman, many experts, folks at the Fed, they say we're not in a recession quite yet. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you go by the traditional definition of a recession, we certainly are, with 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP growth. However, consumer demand continues and unemployment is low. So if they want to continue that argument, so be it. I certainly want to reverse the course that we're on so we don't go into a deep recession. And unfortunately, the Biden administration is going to continue to dig us further into a hole by continuing the assault on domestic energy, by continuing spending, by increasing taxes, by threatening more taxes, by keeping an open border so taxpayer dollars are just being thrown away as my constituents see it. So we really need to reverse course, and frankly, that's why we're here today. The commitment to America is about getting America back on track.
Congressman, we're seeing record high inflation. We're at 8.3% right now. The Fed has just raised the interest rate yet again, another 0.75%. Where are we going from here?
Well, you know, the Fed, of course, is going to increase interest rates. That's what they've traditionally done. Jerome Powell seems to be following the Paul Volcker line of action, which is necessary. But the problem is that the Biden administration is basically countering the actions of the Fed by continuing the spending and continuing the assault on domestic energy, which inflates inflation, if you will, by keeping heating, utility prices, natural gas, as well as gasoline at high prices. I certainly hope Jerome Powell and the Fed don't go too far with these interest rates. They certainly have enormously reduced quantitative easing or the stimulus payments. I just hope the White House wakes up and Biden Democrats to work with the Fed rather than against them so we actually bring down inflation.
Congressman Dan Muser, thank you.
All right, thank you.
As the Biden administration pursues its climate change agenda, reports are surfacing that a major and influential group involved with this has ties to the CCP. The Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, is based in New York City, but it has worked on climate issues in China since the mid-1990s. Several of its top officials have worked for the Chinese Communist Party or its institutions, while also maintaining close working relationships with officials within the Biden administration. According to internal State Department emails, the China-linked group regularly communicates with John Kerry's office on policy issues. John Kerry is the special presidential envoy for climate. On its website, the NRDC highlights its collaboration with, quote, a wide range of Chinese and international partners to boost green policies and strengthen environmental regulations. But the group does not mention China's poor climate record. The country accounts for about 27% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, nearly tripling the total of the United States. Texas Congressman Michael McCaul is the Republican leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He also heads the China Task Force. A large part of the Republicans' Commitment to America plan, if they win the majority in the upcoming midterms, is to hold China's feet to the flame. We had a chance to ask him about this recently.
Well, yeah, I chaired the China Task Force, had a lot of recommendations. Number one is we have to break these supply chains out of China and manufacture in the United States. I mean, this is a great example here in a steel plant in Pennsylvania, Washington County, about how we can make things and manufacture in America and not in China. And that's going to be a broad theme of ours, is to stop this being dependent on China and bring the manufacturing right here to the United States. There are a lot of critical assets like medical, rare earth minerals, semiconductors that we have to do here to protect it. And the other thing that we'll be working very hard on is stop exporting this technology that goes into China's war machine. Good example is a hypersonic that went around the world with precision and landed with precision that can carry a nuclear payload. That was built on the backbone of American technology. So, and this has to stop. And we have to stop exporting this technology to China. We can do that under the Export Control Act. That's my committee. We can also stop capital flows into China that lift up their economy, but also go into their military. For God's sakes, the United States of America should not be arming China.
Congressman, your colleague Whip Steve Scalise said that it's still very important to follow up on China in terms of the origins of the virus. Tell us about what you guys will do on that front.
Well, I released my Origins of COVID-19 report out of the Foreign Affairs Committee. It was very damaging that it was a modified, genetic modified virus that came out of the Wuhan lab. It was a very careless, it was at a level 2 facility, not 4. We believe it leaked out of the lab. When we look at the satellite imagery, everything that was going on in September of that year, that we feel very confident it came out of the lab. And the fact is, some of this was actually invested and paid for by the American taxpayer from the NIH on a joint project, which makes it even more egregious. We need to get to the bottom of that to make sure it never happens again. And then we need to look at how can China pay for all the damage it's done.
The CCP's top officials, specifically the ambassador to the United States, is already reaching out to members of the Republicans on the Intel Committee. How important is it, and what's your message to China when they're trying to message this way?
It's propaganda. They don't talk to me for obvious reasons, but it's all propaganda. It's all based on deceit and lies. If they were serious, they would stop stealing our technology, our intellectual property. The Houston consulate shut down for a reason. In my home state, they were stealing from the Texas Medical Center. They had vials of DNA evidence they were going to send back, and another professor NASA data they were stealing to send back to the mothership. Espionage is on the rise, and yet this administration shut down the China initiative to prosecute espionage. But you know what? Those cases haven't gone away, but why would they shut down the China initiative? And this is the enemy within. And we see it through the 1,000 Talents program, like what we saw Texas Medical Center, but also just the outright espionage that takes place.
Congressman, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And today, the U.S., along with Western allies, proposed for the United Nations main human rights body to hold a special debate on the Chinese Communist Party. The focus is on human rights abuses against Uyghurs and other Muslims in China's Xinjiang region. If the request is approved, it will be the first time that human rights concerns in China have been formally considered in the United Nations. And a federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit filed by parents against Attorney General Merrick Garland. The group of parents attempted to sue Garland for a memo that he wrote. The memo characterized the parents' protest against school district policies as a threat. The memo issued by Garland accused parents of harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school staff and officials. Garland said the Department of Justice would use its authority and resources to discourage such threats, identify them, and prosecute people. A federal judge dismissed the parents' suit against the Attorney General. The judge said that Garland's memo does not impose any regulations, requirements, or enforce actions.